The morning sun peeked through the curtains as Zara stood in front of her bedroom mirror, her hands trembling slightly as they moved through her hair. Today wasn't just any Monday. It was her first day at Riverside High School, and her stomach was doing somersaults. She had spent the whole weekend with her mom, getting her box braids done just right. Every twist and turn was perfect, falling gracefully around her shoulders. "Baby girl, you're going to do amazing things," her mom had said last night, while they sat on their old brown couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn and watching their favorite cooking show. Those words kept repeating in Zara's mind as she adjusted her carefully chosen outfit. A yellow sweater that her grandmother had given her for her 14th birthday matched with her favorite jeans. The drive to school was quiet, but not the uncomfortable kind. Her mom hummed along to the old soul music playing softly on the radio, occasionally glancing at Zara with that knowing smile that always seemed to say everything would be okay. The car rolled to a stop in front of the massive brick building, and Zara's heart skipped a beat. Riverside High School looked even bigger than it had during the orientation. "Remember what I always tell you," her mom said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Your differences are your strengths. You carry the dreams of your grandma, your aunties, and every strong woman in our family." Zara nodded, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. She thought about her dad, who was probably already at the hospital for his early shift as a nurse. He'd left a note in her lunch bag. He always did on important days. The hallways buzzed with excitement and nervous energy as students reunited after summer break. Zara clutched her backpack straps, taking in everything around her. The walls were covered with college pennants, student artwork, and posters announcing club meetings. Everything smelled new, fresh paint, clean floors, and the unmistakable scent of just opened textbooks. She noticed it almost immediately, the way conversations would pause as she walked by, the quick glances that lasted a second too long. In her old school, being one of the few black students hadn't felt this noticeable. Here, it felt like walking through a spotlight she hadn't asked for. But Zara held her head high, remembering how her older cousin had taught her to walk with confidence. "Let them look," her cousin had said during their last video chat. "Show them what grace looks like." Her first class was world history, and she arrived early, choosing a seat near the window where sunlight streamed in. As other students filed in, the empty seats around her remained untouched, like an invisible barrier had been placed there. A girl with glasses and a bright smile almost sat next to her, but then caught her friend's eye and moved to the back of the room instead. During the teacher's introduction, Zara focused on taking neat notes, her new purple pen gliding across the paper. She'd always loved learning, especially history. Her grandfather used to tell her stories about their family's past, about strength and perseverance, about making a way when there seemed to be none. The morning passed in a blur of new faces, classroom rules, and syllabi. By lunchtime, Zara had filled 3 pages of her journal with observations, hopes, and quiet worries. She found a spot in the cafeteria near a large window overlooking the school's garden. As she unpacked her lunch, her mom's famous jollof rice and plantains, she noticed the stares again, heard the whispers. But then she found her dad's note, folded carefully between her napkins. "You're braver than you know, stronger than you think, and loved more than you can imagine." A smile spread across her face as she read it, and for a moment, the whispers faded away. This was just the beginning of her story at Riverside High, and despite the knots in her stomach and the uncertainty in the air, something deep inside told her that she was exactly where she needed to be. Her mom's words echoed in her mind once more. "Your differences are your strengths." Maybe, just maybe, those words would help her write her own story in these unfamiliar halls. 3 weeks had passed since that first day, and the shine of being new at Riverside High was starting to wear off. Zara noticed how things began to change, slowly at first, like clouds gathering before a storm. The quiet whispers she'd heard on her first day had grown louder, more pointed, especially from a group of girls led by Rebecca Martinez. It started with little things. When Zara raised her hand in English class to share her thoughts about their reading assignment, she heard snickers from the back row. "She's trying so hard to sound smart," Rebecca had whispered, loud enough for others to hear. Zara's hand slowly lowered, her answer stuck in her throat like honey. The comments about her hair came next. One morning, after spending hours with her mom doing a new protective style with beads that clicked softly when she walked, Rebecca and her friends followed behind her in the hallway, mimicking the sound and laughing. "It's like walking behind a wind chime," one of them said, setting off another round of giggles. Lunch became the hardest part of her day. The two girls who had initially shared their table with her, Lily from math class and May from science, suddenly had club meetings to attend. Zara knew better. She'd seen them sitting with Rebecca's group, laughing at jokes she couldn't hear. Now she sat alone, pretending to be absorbed in a book while picking at her food. Her phone buzzed less and less these days. The group chat she'd been added to in the first week had gone silent. When she posted a selfie on social media, proud of her new earrings, beautiful wooden pieces her aunt had brought back from Ghana, the comments were less than kind. "Does your family still live in trees?" someone had written. The account was anonymous, but Zara had a pretty good idea who was behind it. One particularly rough Tuesday, during group work in biology, no one wanted to pair up with her. The teacher had to step in, assigning her to work with Rebecca's group. For the entire period, they acted as if she were invisible, talking over her suggestions and excluding her from their notes. When their project received a C+, Rebecca made sure everyone knew it was, because they had to carry the dead weight. That evening, as Zara helped her mom prepare dinner, chopping vegetables perhaps a bit more forcefully than necessary, she tried to keep her voice steady. "Mom, did you ever feel like you didn't belong somewhere?" Her mother paused her stirring, studying Zara's face with those knowing eyes that seemed to see everything. "Baby, what's really going on at school?" But Zara just shrugged, not wanting her mom to worry. She thought about her dad's proud smile when she'd gotten accepted to Riverside, how he'd talked about the school's great academic record and the opportunities it could open up for her. She couldn't let them down. The next day, she spent extra time getting ready, making sure every hair was in place, her uniform perfectly pressed. Her cousin had always said, "When they go low, we go high and look good doing it." But as she walked through the school gates, Rebecca's voice cut through the morning chatter. "Oh look, she's trying to fix herself up. Honey, some things just can't be fixed." Zara felt her carefully constructed confidence crack just a little more. During lunch, she found herself in the library's far corner, her college aspirations journal open in front of her. The pages that had once been filled with dreams and plans now held tear stains and doubts. Her straight A's were slipping to B's, and the debate team tryouts she'd been so excited about seemed like a distant dream now. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, noticed her hiding there and brought her a tissue. She didn't ask questions, just patted Zara's shoulder and said, "Sometimes the hardest storms help us find our greatest strength." Zara managed a small smile, but inside, she wondered how much strength she had left. That afternoon, as she walked to her locker, the clicking of her beads seemed louder than ever. But this time, instead of ducking her head, she lifted her chin slightly. Maybe they could mock her hair, her voice, her dreams, but they couldn't take away who she was. Not unless she let them. The morning started like any other, but it would end up being the day everything changed. Zara stood in front of her locker, trying to remember the last number of her combination. Her hands were shaking slightly. They seemed to do that a lot these days. The group project in history was due today, and she already knew what was coming. Just as expected, during class, Rebecca and her friends had their excuse ready. "We tried to include her," Rebecca told their teacher, her voice dripping with fake concern. "But she never showed up for our study sessions." Zara's mouth fell open. They had never once told her when or where they were meeting. The teacher's disappointed look felt like a punch to the stomach. "Is this true, Zara?" the teacher asked, tapping her red pen against the desk. The words stuck in her throat. How could she explain that they had blocked her number, ignored her emails, and deleted her comments in the shared document? That they had literally pretended she didn't exist whenever she tried to contribute. Instead, she just stared at her desk, her silence taken as guilt. During lunch, she couldn't eat. Her mom's special stew, usually her favorite, sat untouched in her container. Her phone buzzed with a message from her dad. "Hope you're having a great day, princess." The happy emoji he added made her heart hurt. If only he knew. The final bell couldn't come soon enough. Zara practically ran to her locker, wanting to grab her things and get out before Rebecca's group could corner her again. But as she approached, something felt wrong. A small crowd had gathered, some pointing, others quickly looking away when they saw her coming. Her heart stopped when she saw it. Someone had written horrible words across her locker. Words about her skin, her hair, her culture. Words that cut deep into her soul. Words she couldn't even bring herself to read fully. A few students were taking pictures with their phones, and she heard muffled laughter from somewhere behind her. She wanted to run, to disappear, to become invisible. Something she'd been wishing for more and more lately. Instead, she stood there, frozen, her backpack feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds on her shoulders. The walk home that day was a blur. She took the long way, not wanting anyone from school to see the tears that wouldn't stop falling. The same route she used to love because it passed by the park where little kids played, their laughter usually bringing a smile to her face. Today, she barely heard them. At home, she couldn't hold it in anymore. Her mom found her curled up on her bed, her college aspirations journal torn and crumpled beside her. The pages that once held her dreams, joining the debate team, becoming class president, getting into a good college, now seemed like silly fantasies. "Baby, what happened?" her mom asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. And finally, everything came pouring out. The exclusion, the whispers, the social media posts, the project, and now the locker. Her mom held her close, and Zara could feel her shaking with a mixture of sadness and anger. "Your grades," her mom said softly, looking at the progress report Zara had been hiding for weeks. All those nights spent crying instead of studying had taken their toll. Her straight A's had slipped to C's, and her dream of joining the debate team seemed impossible now. They only accepted students with a B average or higher. That night, Zara overheard her parents talking in the kitchen. Her dad wanted to go to the school immediately, but her mom was worried that might make things worse. "She needs to learn to stand up for herself," her mom said, "but right now, she needs to know we're here for her." Later, lying in bed, Zara stared at her ceiling, where the glow-in-the-dark stars she put up years ago still shone faintly. She thought about her grandmother's stories of facing much worse and still standing tall. She thought about her little cousin who looked up to her, who asked for pictures of her at school because she wanted to be just like big cousin Zara when she grew up. Something had to change. She just wasn't sure if she had the strength to make that change happen. As she drifted off to sleep, her tears finally dry, she wondered if tomorrow would be the day things got better or the day they got even worse. The next day, Zara almost didn't go to school. She lay in bed, staring at her ceiling, until her mom gently knocked on her door. "You don't have to go today if you're not ready," she said. But Zara knew staying home wouldn't solve anything. The problems would still be there tomorrow, and the day after that. She walked into English class with her eyes down, sliding into her usual seat near the window. That's when she first really noticed Ms. Carter, the new English teacher who had started just last week. Unlike the other teachers who seemed blind to what was happening, Ms. Carter watched the classroom with careful eyes that didn't miss much. During their lesson about poetry, Rebecca and her friends started their usual routine of whispered comments and stifled laughs when Zara raised her hand to answer a question. But before they could really get going, Miss Carter spoke up. "I'd love to hear your thoughts too, Rebecca," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Since you seem so engaged in our discussion." When Rebecca had nothing to say, Ms. Carter continued teaching, but Zara noticed how she kept the class more focused after that. After class, as Zara was packing up her books, Ms. Carter called her over. "Could you stay for a minute?" Zara's stomach tightened. She wasn't used to teachers noticing her unless something was wrong. But Ms. Carter's smile was warm as she perched on the edge of her desk. "You know, your essay about Maya Angelou really stood out," Ms. Carter said, pulling out Zara's paper. "You understand her work on a deep level." She paused, adjusting her bright yellow head wrap. "I wore my hair like yours when I was your age," she added softly. Zara looked up, really seeing Miss Carter for the first time. She noticed the familiar way her teacher's hair was styled, similar to how her own mom wore hers sometimes. Something in her chest loosened just a bit. "Let me tell you a story," Miss Carter said, pulling up a chair for Zara. "When I was in high school, I was the only black student in my advanced classes. People used to say I was only there to fill a quota." She shook her head, remembering. "One day, I stopped raising my hand. I started getting C's instead of A's. I almost let them dim my light." Zara's eyes widened. She couldn't imagine confident, brilliant Ms. Carter ever feeling small. What changed? "I found my people," Ms. Carter smiled. "Had you heard of the Multicultural Student Alliance? We meet on Thursdays after school. There's this student there, Jordan Chen. I think you'd really like her. She writes for the school paper, and she's been working on some interesting stories about student experiences here." That Thursday, Zara found herself standing outside room 204 after the final bell. Through the door's window, she could see a small group of students sitting in a circle. They weren't all the same. There were students who looked like her, and others who didn't. But they were all laughing together. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. A girl with long black hair looked up and smiled. "You must be Zara," she said, walking over. "I'm Jordan. Miss Carter mentioned you might come. We're just about to start our discussion about cultural representation in media. Want to join?" For the next hour, Zara found herself in the middle of the most open conversation she had since starting at Riverside. Jordan shared stories about being told she wasn't American enough despite being born here. Another student talked about being the only one who wore a hijab in her grade. They didn't just talk about problems. They talked about solutions, about standing up, about making changes. "We all have stories," Jordan said as they packed up. "Sometimes the hardest part is finding the right people to share them with." She handed Zara a notebook with the school paper's logo. "We're looking for new writers, you know. Miss Carter showed me your essay. You've got talent." Walking home that day, Zara felt different. The weight on her shoulders seemed a little lighter. For the first time in weeks, she had somewhere to sit at lunch the next day. More importantly, she had found a place where her voice wouldn't be met with snickers or rolled eyes. That night, she opened her journal again. But instead of writing about her fears, she began writing about hope. About finding unexpected allies in unexpected places. About the power of being seen, really seen, by someone who understood. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. With Jordan's encouragement, Zara started a blog on the school newspaper's website. Her first post was simple. Just her thoughts about feeling different in a new school. She wrote it late one night, curled up in her bedroom window seat, the words flowing easier than she expected. She almost didn't post it, her finger hovering over the submit button for what felt like hours. What's the worst that could happen? She whispered to herself, thinking of Miss Carter's words about not letting others dim her light. She clicked submit and went to bed, trying not to think about it. The next morning, she had 3 comments. Her hands shook as she opened them, expecting the worst. Instead, she found understanding words from other students. One was from a girl in her math class who wrote about being the only one who wore a hijab. Another came from a boy who'd moved from Venezuela last year and still struggled with feeling like an outsider. See, Jordan said during lunch, scrolling through the comments on her phone. You're not alone. There are so many students who feel the same way, but were too scared to speak up. She grinned at Zara. You just gave them a voice. Encouraged, Zara kept writing. She wrote about the little things, the way people touched her hair without asking, the backhanded compliments about how well-spoken she was, the assumptions about where she came from. But she also wrote about bigger things, about pride in her heritage, about the strength she got from her family's stories, about the dreams she refused to give up. Her following grew. Students she'd never spoken to would smile at her in the hallways now. During Multicultural Alliance meetings, more new faces started showing up, clutching printouts of her blog posts. Your words made me feel brave enough to come, one freshman told her, voice barely above a whisper. The school newspaper's editor, a senior named Priya, asked to interview Zara about her blog's impact. You're starting important conversations, she said, scribbling notes. People are listening. Even some teachers have mentioned your posts in class discussions. But not everyone was happy about Zara finding her voice. Rebecca and her friends started leaving nasty comments on her posts. They'd roll their eyes dramatically whenever she spoke up in class. Once, she overheard Rebecca saying, "She thinks she's so special now, like she's some kind of spokesperson for everyone who's different." But this time, the words didn't hurt like before. Each mean comment was drowned out by 10 supportive ones. When Rebecca rolled her eyes, other students would speak up to support Zara's points. The invisible wall that had surrounded her was crumbling, brick by brick. One day, while working on a new post in the library, a quiet girl named Lily, one of the first friends who'd abandoned her, sat down next to her. I read your piece about friendship and betrayal, she said, staring at her hands. I saw myself in it. The part about staying silent when you should speak up, that was me. I'm sorry. Zara looked at her old friend, seeing the genuine regret in her eyes. Sometimes it's hard to stand up to people, she said softly, but it's never too late to start. That evening, Zara wrote about forgiveness, about how standing up for yourself doesn't mean holding on to anger, about how change starts with one person being brave enough to tell their truth. The next morning, Ms. Carter stopped her before class. Your latest post, she said, smiling proudly. The school principal read it. She wants you to speak at next week's assembly about diversity and inclusion. Zara's heart jumped into her throat. Writing behind a screen was one thing, but speaking in front of the whole school, with Rebecca and her friends watching, the thought made her palms sweat. But then she remembered all the comments, all the quiet thank yous in the hallways, all the new faces at Alliance meetings. She thought about that freshman who'd found courage in her words, about Lily choosing to apologize, about Jordan believing in her from the start. Okay, she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice was. I'll do it. That night, she opened her laptop and started working on her speech. She had something to say, and finally, people were ready to listen. The morning of the assembly, Zara's mom helped her style her hair in neat cornrows, their family's traditional style for important occasions. Your grandmother wore her hair like this when she gave her first speech at church, her mom said, fingers moving skillfully. She'd be so proud of you today. But as Zara walked through the school gates, Rebecca and her group were waiting. They'd taken her growing influence personally, and now they had new weapons, social media. Zara's phone buzzed constantly with notifications from fake accounts leaving cruel comments on her blog. They'd even made a group chat dedicated to mocking her upcoming speech. Hope you don't embarrass yourself up there, Rebecca called out as Zara passed by. Though I guess you're used to that by now. Her friends laughed, holding up their phones to record Zara's reaction, probably planning to post it online later. Jordan caught up with Zara at her locker. Have you seen what they're posting? She asked, worried. We should tell Principal Chen. But Zara shook her head. She'd learned something important through her writing. Sometimes the loudest voices were just covering up their own fears. During morning classes, Zara couldn't focus. Her speech notes felt heavy in her backpack, each word carefully chosen over countless drafts. At lunch, she sat with the Multicultural Alliance members, who had become her support system. They shared their own stories of standing up to bullies, each tale adding a little more steel to Zara's spine. "Remember when they used to make fun of my accent?" said Yuki, who had moved from Japan 2 years ago. "Now I'm teaching Japanese to half the drama club." She squeezed Zara's hand. "Your words gave me courage to be proud of who I am." But the bullies weren't done. When Zara opened her locker before last period, she found it plastered with printouts of nasty social media comments about her. Some were from accounts she recognized, others from strangers who had joined in just because they could. Her hands trembled as she pulled them down, but she didn't cry. Instead, she took pictures with her phone. Evidence. Ms. Carter found her there. "Everything okay?" she asked, though her expression said she already knew the answer. Zara showed her the printouts in her phone, with its endless notifications of hate. Her teacher's face darkened with anger, but her voice stayed calm. "You know this says more about them than it does about you, right?" Zara nodded. "I'm still going to give my speech," she said, surprising herself with how sure she felt. "They're just proving why it's needed." As the final bell rang, students filed into the auditorium. Zara waited backstage, peeking through the curtain. She saw Rebecca and her group in the middle rows, phones ready, probably hoping to capture any mistake she might make. But she also saw Jordan, Yuki, and other Alliance members scattered throughout the crowd. They'd promised to sit separately so their support would be visible from every angle. Principal Chen stepped up to introduce her. "We have a student here who started an important conversation in our school community," she said. Her words have inspired many of us to think differently about inclusion and respect. Walking to the podium, Zara felt strangely calm. She looked out at the sea of faces, some friendly, some hostile, most just curious. She saw phones pointed at her, knew that whatever she said would probably end up online. But for the first time, that didn't scare her. 6 months ago, she began, her voice clear and strong. "I sat alone at lunch because I looked different from everyone else. Today, I'm standing here because being different isn't something to hide. It's something to celebrate." She saw Rebecca shift uncomfortably in her seat, but kept going. "I've seen your posts, your comments, your group chats about me. I could stand here and name names, show screenshots, point fingers. But that's not why I'm here." Taking a deep breath, Zara pulled up the next part of her speech, the part she'd written just that morning. "Instead, I want to talk about why people feel the need to tear others down to feel better about themselves. I want to talk about how courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared, but speaking up anyway." As she spoke, she noticed something unexpected. Rebecca's best friend had put her phone down. Other students were doing the same, actually listening. And in that moment, Zara realized that sometimes the biggest resistance to change comes right before the biggest breakthrough. As Zara continued her speech, the auditorium grew quieter with each word. Even the usual whispers and rustling of papers had stopped. She shared stories from her blog, not just her own experiences, but stories others had trusted her to tell. "When I first came here," she said, her voice growing stronger, "I thought being strong meant not letting anyone see me cry. I'd hide in bathroom stalls during lunch, telling my parents everything was fine." She paused, letting her words sink in. But real strength isn't about hiding. It's about being brave enough to show who you really are. In the middle rows, she noticed Rebecca's best friend, Michelle, wiping her eyes. Several other students were nodding, some looking down at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. "We all have moments when we feel like outsiders," Zara continued. "Maybe it's because of how we look, or how we speak, or what we believe. But those differences aren't our weakness. They're our superpower. They're the stories that make us who we are. She pulled out her phone, holding it up. I got dozens of hateful messages this morning. People hoping I'd mess up, telling me to go back where I came from. The audience stirred uncomfortably. But guess what? I'm exactly where I belong. We all are. As she spoke about unity and understanding, something unexpected happened. Michelle stood up in the middle of the auditorium. I need to say something, she called out, her voice shaking. Principal Chen nodded, and Michelle turned to face her classmates. I've been part of the problem, Michelle admitted, tears streaming down her face. I watched people be cruel to Zara and others. I laughed at mean posts. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. She looked directly at Zara. I'm sorry. I was scared of losing my friends, but in trying not to be an outsider, I became something worse, a bystander. The auditorium erupted in scattered applause. Other students started standing up too, sharing their own stories of times they'd stayed silent, times they'd been hurt, times they'd hurt others. Each confession seemed to break down another wall. Zara watched as Rebecca sank lower in her seat, her phone forgotten in her lap. For the first time, she didn't look powerful or intimidating. She looked lost. Principal Chen eventually stepped up to the podium, her eyes glistening. This is exactly the conversation our school has needed, she said. Starting today, we're implementing new anti-bullying policies. But more importantly, we're going to make real changes in how we treat each other. After the assembly, students crowded around Zara. Some wanted to hug her, others wanted to share their stories, and many just wanted to say thank you. Michelle pushed through the crowd, still wiping her eyes. Your speech, she said, pulling out her phone. I saved copies of all the mean messages I sent and the group chats I was part of. I'll show them to Principal Chen myself. You shouldn't have to keep proving what we did. Zara looked at the girl who had once laughed at her tears and saw something new, remorse, and maybe hope. The point isn't to punish people, Zara said softly. It's to change things. That afternoon, walking home with Jordan, Zara felt lighter than she had in months. Students they passed waved or called out hello. Even some teachers stepped out of their classrooms to congratulate her. You know what the best part was? Jordan said, grinning. When Michelle stood up. Did you see Rebecca's face? I thought she was going to disappear into her chair. But Zara remembered how lost Rebecca had looked. Sometimes the bullies are just scared too, she said thoughtfully. Maybe they just need someone to show them a different way. At home, her parents were waiting with her favorite dinner and a surprise, her grandmother on video call from Ghana. We heard all about your speech, her grandmother said, beaming with pride. You carried our family's strength with you today. That night, Zara wrote a new blog post. Not about bullying or pain, but about healing. About how change starts with one voice, but grows stronger with each person brave enough to join in. As she wrote, her phone buzzed with a notification, a new comment on her blog from an anonymous account. Her heart skipped until she read it. Your speech today made me think about who I want to be. I'm tired of being angry all the time. How do you start over when you've hurt so many people? The comment was signed, Aram, Rebecca Martinez. Zara stared at Rebecca's comment for a long time that night, fingers hovering over her keyboard. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to let Rebecca feel just a fraction of the isolation she'd caused. But another part remembered Ms. Carter's words about breaking cycles of hurt. The next morning, Zara arrived early to school and found Rebecca sitting alone on the steps, looking smaller somehow without her usual group around her. When Rebecca saw Zara approaching, she quickly wiped her eyes. I got your comment, Zara said simply, sitting down beside her. The morning air was crisp, and students were just starting to arrive. I didn't think you'd actually talk to me, Rebecca whispered, staring at her hands. Then, words started spilling out like she couldn't hold them back anymore. My mom's Mexican, my dad's white. When I was little, kids used to make fun of me for being mixed. They'd ask if I was legal, tell me to pick a side. She took a shaky breath. When we moved here, I decided to be the person who did the hurting first. I thought if I was mean enough, loud enough, nobody would see how scared I was. She looked at Zara with red-rimmed eyes. I became exactly what I hated. Zara listened, remembering all the times Rebecca had hurt her. But she also saw something familiar in Rebecca's pain, the same fear of being different, of not belonging. "You know what's funny?" Zara said finally. "We could have been friends from the start. We both know what it's like to feel caught between worlds." That conversation became the beginning of something new. Not instant friendship, there was too much history for that, but understanding. Zara helped Rebecca channel her experience into something positive, encouraging her to share her story at the next Multicultural Alliance meeting. At first, some Alliance members were skeptical. Jordan especially had doubts. "How do we know this isn't just another game?" she asked Zara during lunch. But Rebecca proved herself day by day. She started speaking up when other students made racist comments. She helped Zara create a peer mentoring program for students struggling with identity issues. Most importantly, she began learning to be proud of her own mixed heritage. One day, Rebecca brought homemade Mexican sweetbread to the Alliance meeting, something she'd always been too embarrassed to share before. "My abuela taught me how to make it," she said softly. I used to pretend I didn't know how. The mentoring program grew quickly. Students who'd never spoken to each other started sharing stories, finding common ground in their differences. A quiet boy who'd recently moved from Syria worked with a girl from Vietnam to create a welcome guide for new immigrant students. Two freshman girls, one Jewish, one Muslim, became best friends while working on a project about religious tolerance. Principal Chen was so impressed that she asked Zara and Rebecca to present their program at the district education conference. Standing together at the podium, they shared their journey from enemies to allies. "Bullying doesn't just hurt the target," Rebecca explained to the audience of educators. "It hurts the bully too. We build walls to protect ourselves, but end up trapped behind them." Zara added, "The real power comes from breaking down those walls together." Their presentation received a standing ovation. Several other schools asked to implement similar programs. But the real victory was smaller, more personal. That morning, Rebecca had worn her hair in traditional Mexican braids for the first time since elementary school. Later that week, during lunch, Zara found a small package in her locker. Inside was a beautiful journal with a note from Rebecca. "For new stories, thank you for helping me write a better ending to mine." That evening, Zara sat in her favorite spot by the window, opening the new journal. On the first page, she wrote, "Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are fighting battles we can't see. And sometimes our greatest enemies can become our strongest allies in creating change." She looked out at the sunset, thinking about how far they all come. Her phone buzzed with messages from the mentoring group chat. Students sharing victories, asking for advice, supporting each other. Rebecca had just posted about helping her mom prepare for a traditional Mexican holiday celebration, something she'd been ashamed of before. Turning back to her journal, Zara smiled and continued writing. "The hardest walls to break down are the ones we build inside ourselves. But when we're brave enough to let others see our true selves, that's when real healing begins." As sophomore year began, Zara walked through Riverside High's halls with a confidence that came from within. The scared freshman who once hugged the walls was gone. In her place stood a leader who had helped transform not just herself, but her entire school community. The changes were everywhere. New students no longer ate alone. The Multicultural Alliance had created a buddy system to welcome them. The cafeteria buzzed with conversations in different languages, and nobody stared or made comments anymore. Instead, students would ask respectfully about words they didn't understand, eager to learn phrases in their classmates' native tongues. That morning, Zara headed to her first debate team meeting. She'd finally gathered the courage to try out, and to her surprise, Rebecca had been one of her strongest supporters. "You've always had a powerful voice," Rebecca had said during practice. "Now everyone else needs to hear it." The debate team coach smiled as Zara walked in. "Ready to discuss this month's topic? It's about creating inclusive spaces in education, something you know quite a bit about." Other team members nodded in agreement. They'd all read her blog, seen her work with the mentoring program. During lunch, Zara sat at what had become known as the Rainbow Table, a spot where students from all backgrounds gathered to share food and stories. Today, a Pakistani student had brought her mother's biryani, while another student shared traditional Ethiopian bread his grandmother had made. "Remember when we used to get made fun of for our weird lunches?" Jordan said, happily accepting a piece of bread. "Now there's a waiting list to sit at our table." Ms. Carter stopped by, beaming at the scene. "The principal just told me our school's bullying incidents have dropped by 70% since last year," she said. "Your mentoring program is being adopted by 5 other schools in the district." After school, Zara led a mentoring session with a group of freshmen. Among them was a quiet girl who reminded her so much of herself last year. The girl wore her hair in beautiful Senegalese twists, but kept touching them self-consciously. "I used to do that too," Zara told her gently. "Until I realized my hair tells the story of my heritage. Every twist, every braid, it's a connection to generations of strong women who came before us." The girl's eyes lit up. "Really? Some kids in my math class were asking if they could touch it. I didn't know what to say." "Your hair isn't a petting zoo," Rebecca chimed in, joining the conversation. "I learned that lesson the hard way. But if someone asks respectfully and wants to learn about your culture, that's different. You get to set the boundaries." Later that evening, Zara sat in her bedroom, updating her college aspirations journal. The pages that had once been stained with tears now held dreams that felt within reach. Her grades were back to straight A's, her debate team position was secure, and colleges had already started sending brochures. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had shared her latest blog post about the mentoring program's success. The comments section was filled with messages from students at other schools, asking how they could start similar programs. "Dinner's ready," her mom called from downstairs. "And guess what? Your grandmother's on video call. She wants to hear all about your debate team." As Zara headed down, she passed the mirror in the hallway, the same one where she'd once checked her appearance with such anxiety. Now she saw what her family had always seen: a young woman who had turned pain into purpose, fear into strength. Her dad was setting the table, humming along to the old soul music he loved. "There's my little activist," he said proudly. "How many lives did you change today?" Zara smiled, thinking about the quiet freshman with the Senegalese twists, about Rebecca's journey from bully to ally, about all the students who now felt safe being themselves. "I didn't change their lives, Dad," she said. "I just helped them find the strength they already had." That night, before bed, Zara added one final entry to her journal. "Sometimes the hardest battles lead us to our greatest purpose. My story isn't just about overcoming bullying. It's about creating a world where nobody feels like an outsider. And that story is still being written, one person, one conversation, one change at a time." She closed the journal, smiling at the sound of laughter drifting up from her parents watching TV downstairs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But for the first time in her life, Zara wasn't just ready for them. She was excited to see what came next.